in any event, after the crew goes through their physicals, there will be a short ceremony.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the STS-44 post-landing press conference. With us we have Colonel Steve Nagel, who is the acting chief of the astronaut office at the Johnson Space Center. Steve.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Well, I really don't have much to say today. It's all good news. It was an unfortunate circumstance that we had to bring the crew home early, and I'm sure they felt a little bit bad about that. But overall, given the failure that we had, the flight rules dictated with one inertial measurement unit failed that we would do what's called a minimum duration flight and bring the orbiter and its crew home today. The weather turned out to be very cooperative. We thought there might be a problem with the winds early on, but that turned out to not be the case, and came down on the planned deorbit, and I think Fred made a really nice landing. So all in all, it was a very good day for us, and we're happy to have the crew back. They're all in excellent health and good spirits, and glad to be home, albeit a couple of days early. So there's really not much else to say. We went out and looked at the orbiter on the lake bed, and it looks very good. Very few dings on the tile. The wheels and the tires all look in very good shape. So externally, it looks like it survived the flight and the re-entry extremely well. And that's about all I have to comment on. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, we'll go to questions now. Please wait for the mic and state your name and affiliation.
Hi, Steve. Lee Siegel from Associated Press. I have a series of short questions. How did the IMUs, the two remaining ones, work on the descent? Did they function normally?
Just fine. And I have not checked back with Mission Control, but I know that there were no failures at all. One of those was a new IMU called a high accuracy inertial measurement unit, and it did very well through the whole flight.
Okay.
The one that they had turned off and powered back that later failed was one of the older models.
Okay. And do you know, Story Musgrave exceeded the old 576-hour record for the time a shuttle astronaut spent in space. Do you know what the actual total was? Because I didn't hear by how many hours he went over that.
No, I didn't realize that. We'll go back and figure it out, though, I'm sure.
Okay.
Story probably knows the number.
And do you have the rollout length? Or just, did it go pretty
No.
much to the end of the 5.2-mile runway?
They rolled almost the full length of the runway by intent because one of the test objectives was to determine the hardness of this runway and of the northern lakebed runways. And the way to do that without polluting that data is to leave the brakes off.
What's the point of determining the hardness?
Well, the north end of the lakebed is drier and harder, and we may well shift the runways, the primary runways of the shuttle to be at the north end of the lakebed because they're less susceptible to being wet and soft and unusable at various times of the year. So this is one of the DTOs, or development test objectives, that we carry when we can to land on the northern runway and then leave the brakes off and let it roll. So the rollout distance is going to look quite long on this flight because Fred didn't apply the brakes until near the very end.
And when will the ferry flight be? What's the best guess now? What day?
I really don't know the answer to that. It'll take him a few days, though, to do the press.
Usually it's, what, 5?
I think so, but I don't have that answer now. I can get that for you.
And the final question, what are the plans then for the astronauts' departure? They're not going to leave tonight, they'll leave tomorrow?
We're determining that right now, but tentatively we are planning to spend the night and get them out of here tomorrow morning. That may change, and we're going to confirm that right after I get done here.
Do you know about what time?
If we left tomorrow morning, I think it would be around 9 or 10 in the morning.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
My colleague Tom Hewell from CBS Radio. My colleague seems to have covered quite a wide range of questions. I thought I saw on the select video what appeared to be a part of some kind on the dry lake bed on the runway. Do you have any information as to what that was, what it may have been?
No, I don't. This is after wheel stop? You saw
Yes, this was after wheel stop.
No, I don't, but I'm sure we'll hear about it if there was. I was walking around under the orbiter. I didn't see anything there, but it's something we'll surely follow up on.
Thank you.
Mike Wynn, Bakersfield, California. And I was curious, because the last two flights have been diverted to Edwards, is NASA considering possibly sending the shuttle back to Edwards as a primary landing site?
No, we're giving equal priority to landings at Kennedy and Edwards. So we're actually trying to land the shuttle when we can for flights that meet all our requirements at Kennedy. And this would have been one of those flights, all other things being equal. Had the IMU not failed, had there been good weather, we would have landed them at Kennedy. Turned out on the last flight, we were actually targeting for Kennedy as a primary landing site, but the weather was not so good that night, so that kept them out, and we landed here. On this particular case, the flight rules for the failure of an IMU dictate that you will land at a field with a lake bed complex, i.e. Edwards, and so we were simply following the flight rules as they're written for that failure case to bring it in here. Yes, sir.
Ron Schenkman with the Antelope Valley Press. I'm curious, as the shuttles get reconfigured for longer flight duration, is that going to dictate more landings at Edwards than Kennedy in the future, the next few years?
Not necessarily. Right now we're restricting ourselves for landings at Kennedy to be at lighter gross weights, and some of the shuttle flights coming up with space labs in them are heavier than our criteria for planning an end mission to Kennedy. So you'll see some missions landing here. But along with that, there are handling qualities improvements coming along for ground handling on the shuttle, like new tires. We already have the improved brakes, but improved nose wheel steering and a drag chute. And when those types of improvements have come along, we will be taking even the heavier vehicles and flying them back, trying to fly them back to Kennedy as a planned end of mission landing site. So I guess the answer is you're going to see a mix of landings both here at Edwards and back at Kennedy, and some of those will be driven by systems improvements, and others will be driven by just the situation you have for a given day in terms of weather.
Okay, we'll go now to the Kennedy Space Center for questions, and then Goddard, and then we'll come back here. Kennedy?
This is Sharish Date with the Orlando Sentinel. A couple of questions. First, the runway that was chosen up until, I guess, 20 minutes before deorbit burn, that was 04. Is that a concrete or lake bed?
04 is concrete. It's the long concrete runway, and 05, of course, is the lake bed runway.
Now, if yesterday the rationale for coming back to Edwards, because it's got the lake bed runways and therefore a larger margin of safety, why choose 04 when 05 is almost parallel with that?
Well, we wanted to come back to a lake bed complex, not necessarily to land on a lake bed runway. That protects the option of downloading to other runways if you have subsequent failures of the one of the other two inertial measurement units. But the rule did not dictate that we had to land on a lake bed runway itself. Now, ultimately, 05 was chosen, but it could have as well been 04.
Second, is there any sort of guess at all as to where along 05 the touchdown point was, whether it was pretty early on or halfway or anything like that?
Well, I was watching. We were in the shuttle training airplane, and we're some distance behind and above them when they touched down. It appeared to me they touched down very near the touchdown markers, or just slightly past. So it must have been around 2,500 to 2,700 feet down the runway. But we'll get you an exact number after the measurements are taken.
Okay, and finally, we're a little curious, the white plasters or Band-Aids, something on Tom Hennon's face, is that anything to do with the flight, or is that part of the medical test objective, or what was that?
The latter. It's part of one of the medical test objectives that he was participating in. Yes, that's correct.
Lee, if you'd wait till we come back to Dryden for questions.
Okay, I'll get back to that.
Joe Chen, Earth News. Steve, a little bit more on the justification for why lake beds. What was the derivation behind why, if you lose one IMU, you have to go to a lake bed complex as opposed to a runway complex? And was there any consideration given to KSC or Northrop?
No serious consideration was given to KSC. With the failure of one IMU, now you're looking conservatively at what happens if another IMU degrades or fails, and you could have degraded navigation accuracy. So going to a lake bed complex of runways gives you a lot more options in case the navigation is not as accurate as you'd like it to be, to put the airplane down on a lake bed. That's the reason for the rule, and it is conservative. In fact, their navigation was excellent on two IMUs. But as I said before, it does not dictate that you have to land on a lake bed runway. We could have landed on hard surface runway 04.
This is Irene Brown with Florida Today. I was just wondering what's going into the consideration of whether the astronauts will fly back to Houston tonight or tomorrow. Is there some medical objectives or some tests or something that you're considering?
Oh, the primary consideration is length of crew duty day, both for the crews and of course, for their families, and as well as the aircraft crews that fly them back, because given the schedule they're on now, having landed when they did, would get them back to Houston at 2 in the morning or after their time. So we're looking at just keeping them here overnight and running them back the next morning.
Okay, we'll go now to the Goddard Space Flight Center.
Good evening from Goddard Space Flight Center. This is A.R. Hogan with Ad Astra Magazine and Reuters Plus Newsroom. Series of short questions, please. Would the hold off on the brakes rollout on the runway procedure have been tested at Kennedy Space Center on this mission had you landed there as the nominal plan called for?
No, it wouldn't. I mean, we know the hardness characteristics of the concrete. What you're looking for in the lake bed is how hard is the lake bed at the northern end. And so if you want to get a pure test without complicating the data, you land and you just let it roll. Thereby you can measure the deceleration rate, and that deceleration rate is corresponding directly to just the rolling friction of the lake bed itself and how soft it is. If you put on the brakes, then you've got to be able to account for how much of the deceleration was caused by the brakes and how much was caused by the lake bed itself, and that's more difficult. So the easiest way is just to leave the brakes off, and it doesn't matter when you have a runway that long, and let it roll until near the end when you have to stop.
Okay. What percentage of the mission's goals were met on this shortened flight? What proportion of the planned objectives were met on this mission?
I can't give you a number on that. It was a large percentage. Of course, the primary mission was the deployment of the satellite, which they did on the first day of the mission, so that was the very important part. They had a whole host of secondary experiments and medical tests, which were in the process of being done, so obviously some of those got cut short as a result of this. It doesn't mean all the data was lost, because they'll get the information that they can from 7 days of flying instead of 10 days. So the mission is a resounding success, even though it was cut off 3 days early.
Would you say a ballpark guess would be 80 or 90% of the planned goals or objectives?
That's a guess, but really to answer a question like that properly, you'd have to go back and really look at each experiment and make a count. But I think I could comfortably say 80 to 90% is certainly in the ballpark.
That part on the runway that we saw, I heard it was sort of a small, dark part, and I heard someone speculate it might be something called a connector. Does that jog your recollection on what it might be, or was it something that would have fallen off from outside of the shuttle, or would it have fallen off from some of the processing equipment brought up, or any speculation on what that might have been?
Well, I really...
maybe the size of your hand or smaller.
I don't know. I really can't speculate on that because I didn't see it and I don't know. We'll just have to find out what it was and give you the answer later on that one.
Last question from Goddard. Following up on an earlier question from Phil Chen, I believe. Did I hear you say anything, I don't think I did, about whether New Mexico, the Northrop Strip, was considered at all as a backup that you couldn't have got down, say, today or tomorrow at Edwards? Was that figuring in your plans at all, please?
I believe it was figuring into the plans, but in a minor way. Actually, the weather forecast for today was a bit questionable, and as I said, it turned out to be better, thankfully, than we thought, but the forecast for tomorrow was a lot better than today. So the chances of having to go anywhere else were very, very low, and we really felt we were going to get into Edwards either today or tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back now to Dryden and take a few more questions before we close.
Mark Posner from SOAR. I'm wondering, one of the reasons this mission was originally extended to 10 days was to prepare for longer flights next year. What does coming home early do to that?
Well, coming home early, you might say sets those plans back a little bit, but I don't think significantly, because we're going to fly other missions of equal or greater length. We've got one coming up next year of 13 days in length, STS-50 in the early summer, and we've already flown missions to date that were longer than this one. We've had one 11-day mission than this one was planned for, I mean.
What were the electrodes for on him
Say your
in
name.
space? Lee Siegel again from AP.
They were part of a vestibular experiment, and I can't remember the name of that right now.
Well, what's it for? I mean, what's the experiment do? Are they measuring brain waves or blood pressure? I mean, what are those?
Basically measuring eye movement and coordination, neurovestibular types of things during the reentry.
Thanks.
Okay, and the readaptation back to 1G.
Colonel Tom Hewell, Colonel Tom Hewell from CBS Radio again. You were doing the simulated approaches in a training aircraft, then in a Gulfstream, I believe from 10 o'clock until shortly before touchdown. From your experience, could the shuttle have come down at 12:58, its original scheduled time, or were the winds too strong at that point?
No, I
What
think,
did you see?
well, in retrospect, as it turned out, and this is it's always easy looking back on it, it could have come in at the 1 o'clock landing time. It could have made it in. But knowing what we knew in the morning, the forecast was for worse conditions and improving through the day. So I think it was good judgment to say we just won't try on that first opportunity so we don't, unnecessarily tire the crew, getting them suited, only to wait through perhaps one opportunity to another one. Rather, we'll just take a chance at two opportunities. But as it turned out, yeah, they could have landed on the first opportunity.
How would you have rated those weather conditions, best to worst?
It was getting a little better as the day went on, actually. I'd say it was, in my opinion, it was landable on that first opportunity, but it was better on the opportunity in which they landed. The surface winds were coming down. They were getting better.
Okay, if we have no further questions, when the plans are finalized as to the crew departure, if there will be a ceremony tonight, we will announce that locally on NASA and on NASA Select. We will carry it if it is tonight. Thank you, Colonel, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.